First, would like to just say I'm really grateful for SoulTopia inviting me out, Michelle and Roger Welch and everyone else here at this awesome venue. It's been a real pleasure to be able to work with everyone and just be invited to come speak at this Out of This World event. And my name is Daniel Allen Jones. I'm really interested in a lot of speculative phenomenon, spiritual philosophies, and scientific mysteries. We'll be talking about a lot of those different things today. I'm also a musician. I play drums, and of course, this is my band here. We tour all over the galaxy. We have a lot of fun. I also manage a conscious media network called Vortexus, and I like to get into a lot of different alternative subjects, not just aliens, but other studies like cryptozoology, Bigfoot, paranormal phenomenon, ghosts, ancient sites, a number of different other types of issues, spiritual, metaphysics, all kinds of neat stuff. And it's okay, don't worry, I've got all my permits. Some of the are a little expired, but I'll get those renewed here soon. My presentation today is entitled, Do They Exist? Aliens, Bigfoot, Ghosts, and Paranormal Phenomena. There's a lot to it. Basically, this is an allegorical question. People have different opinions, feelings, experiences about these types of things, but we're going to discuss some of the people that I've talked to, some of the places I've gone to, some of the information that I've researched. Everything you see in this presentation is a form of multimedia that I've taken myself. None of it's from Google or anything like that. And I'd be glad to share anything that you see in my presentation today with you. I have a YouTube channel, Vortexus Network, where you can find most of the content that you'll be seeing here in my presentation today. Some of the topics we'll be covering are ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomena. Ufology is the study of UFOs, which is unidentified flying objects. It doesn't necessarily mean extraterrestrial vehicle or aliens, flying saucers, things like that. It could mean any number of things as long as it's something that's aerial and we can't identify it. And it also basically pertains to the study of aliens and extraterrestrials. So there's a wide variety of things that ufologists cover. Some terms that we can go over for you guys that if you're not familiar are UAP, which is a more official term, unidentified aerial phenomenon. We also have unidentified submersible objects, things that go in the water. We also have the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is very prevalent amongst different theorists that think that aliens are EBEs, extraterrestrial biological entities, flesh and blood aliens from other worlds. There are many other different alternative perspectives which we'll get into as well. Then of course we have the non-human entities. This could mean a number of things also. So there are all kinds of different types of aliens that people talk about and describe in their experiences and research. This is a fun group that I took a picture of from some Star Wars cosplayers. Do we live in a galaxy that's like Star Wars where there are just a multitude of different types of aliens? Can you guys think of any of the common types of aliens that people describe? Feel free to shout some out. What do you guys think? What are some of the common aliens we talk about?
The Greys.
Greys, yep. The tentacle ones, yeah. Reptilians, it's a common one as well. Anything else? Yeah, insect ones.
Insect ones. They also had like almost like Nordic types.
Nordics, yep. Well, we have a wide variety. It seems that we do seem to be in a sort of Star Wars type reality where there are a lot of different types of these alien type beings. We have human types, whether they're the Pleiadians, Nordics, tall whites, the blue ones, often depicted in ancient mythologies and things like that. By the way, this is a picture of my partner and I from the Roswell Festival just recently. We went and participated in the UFO alien costume contest, and we won. So we had a great time. I'm a Pleiadian bounty hunter, and she's a blue alien. So this is to give you a representation of maybe what some humanoid aliens would be like. We also have aquatic types, beings that would come from other worlds that are biological in nature that live in aquatic settings and environments. Their biological makeup would consist of things similar to what we understand as maybe amphibious or fish-type creatures, something like that perhaps. This is a fun sign in New Mexico that is kind of playing along with their alien theme. There are also perhaps feline types. People generally seem to think that there are these giant cat humanoid, feline humanoid type aliens from different parts of the galaxy, different star systems. It's very interesting, of course. We've got some right there on their spaceships flying around, beaming off. Of course, we've got the avian types. This has become a popular one with different figures in this field lately. If you could imagine a giant bird-like humanoid, going around in spaceships, that would be really interesting to come across and meet. Plant-like beings. That would be a very fascinating thing to come across, as a plant-like being who's made and composed of organic materials like trees or flowers and greenery, things like that. People sometimes talk about the lesser-known type of alien of plant beings. That would be very interesting. What about insect-type beings? It'd be kind of, not to freak anyone out, but it's kind of a stigmatic type thing that people have with insects. Seeing a spider kind of causes this thing to invoke in people. But if you could imagine a giant insectoid type being, people talk about the mantis beings, things like that. That's kind of a alerting sight. And so I think that there's a lot to all these different types of beings. Of course, you have the reptilian types. That's something a lot of people have discrepancies of if they're, in war with some of the other ones. Are they good or bad? And I can only imagine if there's reptilian types, they're probably going to eat a lot of the insect types as well. That's kind of something I've thought it's interesting. What about other types? People talk about the grays, Andromedans, or even synthetic beings that have been, biomechanically constructed and or are robotic in nature. There's lots of different types of theories about the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So, what would aliens eat and drink? It's kind of one of those things that we can only speculate on if we're coming from the EBE, biological entity perspective, which is, if they're from another world, we have to be considerate of the chemical compositions that those planets provide for their nutrient intake. So are they walking around eating cheeseburgers and gulping down sodas and things like that? They could have their own versions of fast food. They could have their own versions of absorbing in nutrients that we're just beginning to understand in a way that allows us to comprehend what an unworldly civilization might do for its energetic intake. What kind of languages would they use? Would they be familiar with some kind of mathematical formulas that we can see are patterns in nature, like the Fibonacci, fractal, golden ratio patterns, pi? Would they be familiar with these numbers that we kind of are discovering in nature, and would they use them as common means of communication? That's a very interesting type of thing to take into consideration. Maybe they speak, so to speak, telepathically in a way that we don't have to use words. Perhaps they're beyond just physical speech. What about their technology? Do they have their own version of the internet? Is there something that they use to communicate on a massive scale with their civilizations all around interstellar colonies? There could be a lot to it. Have they used this technology to visit Earth? Well, there's all kinds of different indications that perhaps they have. One of the largest grossing tourist attractions for UFOs and aliens in general is, of course, Roswell, New Mexico. How many of you guys have been to Roswell? It's a pretty interesting place when they have the festival. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot going on. They do have a International UFO Museum and Research Center. It's a really fascinating place. They have a lot of great things to go check out and see in their exhibits. Definitely recommend it if you go there. And they have speakers come during their festival. It's a really good time. Definitely recommend checking it out. We were just there for their 70th anniversary, 70 years since their crash back in '47. So they commemorate things like that, and they invite people to come and celebrate this topic openly. When we think about visitations, there's a lesser known, but equally important, if not more so, incident, which took place right here in the DFW area, in a small place called Aurora, Texas. And you guys heard to have been to Aurora, Texas? It's just north of Fort Worth, about 20 minutes. They have a historical marker that tells about what happened there. It says, this site is also well known because of the legend that a spaceship crashed nearby in 1897. That's 120 years ago this year. Come on in, guys. You're welcome to come. And the pilot killed in the crash was buried here. So not only was it just a UFO sighting, it was a crash. Not only was it just a crash of a UFO, there was also a body of a being Could be an alien. It was also buried. So that's several different things happening right here at once, right here in DFW, 120 years ago, this year. I went there with my good friend Jim Mars about 2 years ago. We went up to the City Hall to speak with City Administrator Dr. Tony Wheeler, pictured there on the right. And we said it would be great to do an honorary event to commemorate this incident officially. They were completely on board with it. The following year, we held the first ever Aurora Alien Encounter, which was a huge conference with great speakers, a tour of the crash and burial site, and it was a lot of fun. So this is something that the city has taken upon themselves to really kind of promote, become a more, made more aware through events and attractions. And so if you haven't ever visited Aurora, Texas, I definitely recommend doing so. They just erected their monument that welcomes people into the town. Of course, you've already probably met Ned, their local alien, and he's having a good time. He's showing us where he crashed. He hit a windmill, and I'll just briefly explain for those of you who don't know. In 1897, Ned here crashed his cylindrical metallic object into a windmill. It exploded. There was debris everywhere. Remains of this inhuman body were found, later to be collected and buried in the cemetery, and the debris of which was buried in the local well right next to the windmill. It was all connected, and there's a lot to that. You can go visit the site today. The grave is there with a marker. It's very interesting. It's about an hour away from here. Great place, definitely recommend it. And they're looking to continue doing events to commemorate this incident. Aurora, Texas. Yes, a family moved in the early 40s. They took out all the debris. They wanted to use the well for drinking water, which they later regretted because they ended up getting huge maladies on their hands and all over their body, which they basically said was due to the radiation from that space alien and his ship, the Oates family. So that's something you can look into. We got presentations that tell all about this incident. It's very interesting. I think Jim Mars calls it the smoking gun of UFOs, ufology. It's very fascinating. Happened 120 years ago. That's pre-Wright brothers, pre-modern aviation. It's something that a lot of people don't realize happened right here.
Did take a picture of it before they buried it. Well, no, 1800.
I don't think they had means of really. Yeah, it would have been all over Instagram and everything, you know.
Did they take
So,
a drawing? Did anyone draw?
someone drew. There was a few different depictions of what was described as the remains of a body which were recovered. There was no real full body. It was just remains. They said it was not of this world. They said they were very sure that it was not a human and that the gravesite was only about the size of a small child. Was it an alien? Was it a subhuman? There could be any number of possibilities. They like to play along with the alien phenomenon.
In 1897, they didn't have Kodak cameras or whatever, but they did have some that.
Just not widely accessible. But later on, they did do markings on the first few gravestones, which were stolen, that depicted a disc-shaped or egg-shaped object. Could be indication of what the ship looked like. So I think that there's something to it.
Written accounts with descriptions? Written accounts?
Yes, there are people that were descendants of the ones who had direct experience and interaction with the debris, the site, and there have been publications in the Dallas Morning News or Morning Herald and Fort Worth Star Telegram, things like that, later on, Telegram. But there's a lot of really interesting things that show that something happened. Whether it was alien or not, we don't know. I think that it's a good possibility that it was something that we don't really have a good explanation of. They like to play along with the possibility that it's an alien, but who cares about aliens and UFOs anyway, right? It's a really weird subject. But there are a lot of people actually, and there's some really big names in the field of ufology. George Norrie, the host of Coast to Coast AM, gets millions of listeners. He talks all about aliens and UFOs and a number of other interesting alternative subjects that a lot of people are actually into. So it's not really so closed off that, you know, it's just crazy people, but there are a lot of openly ambitious people who do good work in this subject. We also have Chase Kletzky of KGRA Paranormal Talk Radio. She does great investigative work in the field and has recently done some conclusions with what was known as the Star Child Skull. We'll get into that here in just a moment. There's also a group called MUFON, stands for the Mutual UFO Network. Anyone ever heard of that group or been to any of the meetings? There's a local group here, chapter in the DFW area you can go to, meeting actually next weekend, next Sunday if you care to. It's in Grapevine, open discussion. They research UFO reports. They don't really research just aliens, but they research people's reports of what they describe as unidentified flying objects and phenomenon like that. Speaking of UFOs, what kinds of UFOs are there? What types of UFOs are people seeing? All different kinds of shapes and strange things out there. Anywhere from the discs to the triangles. Those are probably the most common. Triangles probably more common than the disc. That's a lesser known fact about some of these sightings. According to statistics that have been taken over the last century, it seems like flying triangles are more prevalent than discs, according to some research. Flying triangles have been known to be small jet-sized to very large, along with other cylindrical-shaped craft, potentially a mile wide or more. They're enormous. We could be dealing with something that's mechanical in nature, nuts and bolts, as people often describe, or something completely different, energetic and otherwise. There's a lot to it. MUFON has a field investigator's manual for their researchers, which they publish depictions of alien-type beings and entities. Well, here's some of those that they publish. And I'll just fly through these, but there's our reptilian and Nordic, and some other human-like. And they could be walking among us. Some people talk about they're in our governmental, buildings, and we would never know.
Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, the reptilian, right?
Very serious, yeah.
David Icke talks about that. A lot of people say that some of the high up, officials are perhaps extraterrestrial or otherwise in origin. Yep.
When Justin Bieber was, after he got arrested for the car speeding that he was racing that he was doing, they slowed down the vehicle. You can see his eyes change from actual pupils to reptilian.
Yeah, that's a common phenomenon that people are now keeping track of due to our, social media. Are the eyes changing? Does that indicate non-human origins? Perhaps. I think there's something to it. They also include this guy over here, and they say, oh, well, if you see one of these, that's Bigfoot. That's not an alien, that's Bigfoot. We don't deal with that, according to MUFON. Which is interesting that they would include that, and they say, just make sure that if you see this, you just know that it's not an alien. Well, that's their point of view, but speaking of Bigfoot, we're going to jump into the field of cryptozoology. Has anyone ever heard that term before? It's a very fascinating study of unknown animals. That's what that word means. Zoology, study of animals, crypto, unknown, or hidden. Yep. And strange creatures are usually referred to as cryptids in the study of cryptozoology. Well, who cares about these strange creatures, right? Cryptozoologists, like my good friends Ken Gerhard and Nick Redfern, they do a lot of awesome work in this field to uncover what some of these strange creatures actually are. They wrote a book called Monsters of Texas, where they go around and get into reports about strange sightings of these mysterious creatures all around the state that talk about, chupacabra sightings or even other stranger things. Very fascinating stuff. Craig Woolheater, he's the founder of Crypto Mundo and also the host of the Texas Bigfoot Conference, which he's holding a little flyer of there. That's coming up later this year in October. Definitely recommend checking that out. It's over in Jefferson, Texas. And what is Bigfoot anyway? It's just a word that came out in the 50s to describe something that people experienced that's been happening for several centuries before then. But we use it as our modern nomenclature to basically describe this hulking, like 400-pound, somewhat bipedal hominid, primate perhaps. Is it an alien? Most classical cryptozoologists think it's just a yet-to-be undiscovered primate, ape-like creature, but some people think it's got other mystical qualities, like it could be part of an alien group, something like that. So are there different types of this creature? Well, some people talk about the Yeti, the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeren, the orang pendek. There are a lot of different kinds, and they're seen all over the place. Where do these guys live? Well, what does he eat? I would have to say, if you put a big plate of barbecue out in front of the cave or in the forest, it probably would eat it. I'm almost certain that they are carnivorous, if not omnivorous. Some people like to think, no, they just eat plants, or they're friendly, they're tree people. But I've heard some other interesting reports that they are also meat eaters. So be careful if you encounter a Bigfoot. You don't want to get snatched up. But it's something that we have to take into consideration. Like, what would the aliens eat? According to their chemical compositions, they need their certain nutrient intake as well. Same thing with Bigfoot. Does it actually have a Bigfoot? According to our findings, there are castings all over the place of enormous footprints, far beyond the size of a ravaged human. We're talking very big, and I've got one back here if you'd like to see it. It's about this big. It's not just someone pressing in, making a footprint. These are tracks that show sediment layers that have been pressed in as a flat foot, not a heel-toe step, but a flat stomp, which is how these creatures seem to walk. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, a very renowned researcher regarding Sasquatch, has put together a field guide when you're out in the field to keep an eye out for them and things to look out for if you happen to be in an area where there might be one. But where would you use this? Where is Bigfoot? Well, he's all over the place. He's in North America, he's in South America, he's in Asia, he's in Europe. People don't realize that this isn't an isolated phenomenon. There have been sightings of mysterious hominids all over the world, and we have them pretty much in every state. Do they migrate? Do they move around? That's a good question, and I think it opens up more questions than it does answers. So I think that it's worth looking into.
Will that apply to Yeti?
Yeti is actually a form of this creature, you could say perhaps a type of Bigfoot, which is commonly misconceived as being white, when it is actually most likely covered in snow. Something to take in consideration. There's a nice place over in Fouke, Arkansas, where he likes to hang out, at the Monster Mart, where they had this huge convenience store all dedicated to this. It's great. And it's actually because of a sighting that happened there in Boggy Creek. There I'm with my good friend Lyle Blackburn, who wrote some books on the Beast of Boggy Creek, which they made a movie of back in like the 70s. Really hokey stuff, but it's fascinating. This is Boggy Creek. This is where a creature has been sighted, right over here on the border of Texas and Arkansas. What about over here in our area, our neck of the woods? Lake Worth, the Lake Worth Monster. Any of you guys ever heard of that or been out to Lake Worth? This happened back in the 70s. Some people call it the Goat Man, another interesting cryptid, I guess you could say, over at Greer Island, where what they call the Lake Worth Monster was seen, spotted on numerous occasions, where there's also a number of paranormal phenomenon and activity that's been recorded, like orbs and lights and things like that. Was there a Bigfoot in Fort Worth, in Lake Worth, Texas? Maybe so. Does Bigfoot have any special powers, or is it just an ape that's more like a human than just a gorilla? Well, most classical cryptozoologists, once again, don't think so. They think it's just that, a large hominid that's broken off from, different groups and has made its way into areas, remote places that we haven't really been able to understand so much about yet. Nick Redfern offers some alternative theories about infrasound that these creatures might produce, causing sort of a stir or fright in people, just as tigers might use to do so with prey and other creatures. This is not something that is completely so far out that we cancel it out. I think it's worth taking into consideration as well. Chupacabra, like you said, there's something to it that people think the chupacabra might be a form of alien, the bloodsucker or the goat sucker, right? The chupacabra from Puerto Rico is a little different than our Texas style one, which is known as the blue dog. Just a bad case of mange and other deformities it actually turns out to be. Flying monsters. Well, there have been sightings of things like potential pterodactyl and other strange creatures flying about. Ken Gerard talks about encounters with flying humanoids like Mothman and other strange instances. So pterodactyls, those are dinosaurs, right? Are there any living dinosaurs, or have we ever had any interactions with humans and dinosaurs? Adam Davis, world-renowned cryptozoologist, travels all over the place, but he went to the Congo in search of Mikili Mbembe, what they call a ferocious beast that basically resembles a dinosaur. And it's something that people are still wondering about, but this is a possibility. There are things like the tracks down in Glenrose that show possible human prints next to dinosaur prints, right here in Glenrose. That's incredible. And we also have what's called the Ica stones. Ica stones are artifacts from Peru that show basically humans riding and interacting with dinosaurs. What about giants? Have there been any giant creatures or giant humanoids? Joe Taylor from the Mount Blanco Fossil Museum out in Crosbyton, Texas thinks so. He's got a replica or a model, which he describes as from a report he got out in Turkey, which would show a 14-foot tall humanoid. Pretty incredible stuff. What about strange relics, strange skulls, elongated Peruvian skulls, interesting mystery. Something's come up about the mummies in Nazca with the elongated skulls. That's become a modern thing that's popping up in this area, and it's something that people are wondering about. Well, what about the mysterious Star Child skull? Have you guys ever heard of that? Lloyd Pye did some research on it, and he thought it was a hybrid alien. Turns out the owner, Melanie Young, and Chase Kletsky did the investigation, various scientific methods to determine that it is in fact Native American. It is not alien. Sorry for the hysteria. But that's the great thing about doing legitimate and authentic scientific work. It gleans great insight in the medical field, though. Does this mean that some of these creatures might just be mutants? Are we dealing with just a deformity that makes it seem like they're different? That might be the case. Now we're going to jump into some paranormal phenomena. Things like ghosts and spirits, ADC, which is after-death communication, orbs and mystery lights. Very ambiguous area, but I think it blends in with many of these subjects. So who cares about paranormal phenomena anyways, right? Well, a lot of people. Brandy Herr, over here in Granbury, she hosts the Haunted Granbury Tour and the Paranormal Expo every year. It's a great place. She wrote a book on it as well. Recommend checking that out. It's going to happen later this year. People like Jeremy Jones of Paranologies designs technology to attempt to detect and give us physical evidence of this paranormal activity. Great stuff. Dr. Jan Holden, a near-death experience counselor who helps people with inducing after-death communication, with understanding their near-death experiences, which gleans insight into a number of other realms, spirituality and paranormal and everything. Well, what about possession? People talk about items and people being possessed with spirits, and that it's changing the way they act, manipulating them. Could aliens or other entities be involved with this, or is it just our idea of ghost? Could be a lot. What about communication? What means and mediums do we have to use to communicate and commune with these spirits? People like to talk about Ouija boards. What about crystals? People talk about crystals having entities coming inside of them and harnessing the power of the crystal to retain its information and wisdom. Crystal skulls. What about the orbs phenomenon? You guys ever get orbs in your pictures? It's a very convoluted issue. There's a lot in this picture here, hard to see, but is it just a photographic anomaly? Are we dealing with dust particles and refractions of light, lens flares, or are they actually pictures of spirits and people that have passed on? Maybe so. One neat thing I'd like to share with you guys about is the Marfa lights. Anyone ever been to Marfa? Marfa, Texas, down near Big Bend. They had the Marfa mystery lights happening for well over 2 centuries at least, since recorded back in the 1800s, where settlers would report ghost fires from the Apaches or something like that. They'd ride out to go see what it was, never found them. This is an observatory that got put out just a while back to go see the lights. It's a beautiful place. This is the view during the daytime. At nighttime, you see orbs changing colors floating around in sync way out there in the desert. This one on the bottom is the same orb changing colors, the same light, just going through a myriad of the color scheme. Very beautiful stuff. It's something that I definitely recommend. If you ever get to go through Marfa, check out the lights. It's amazing. What are they? Scientists say that it's just car lights. They're not car lights. You can see the ones that are cars coming down the highway. These dance around high up off the ground, illuminating down below. They divide into two. They float around and dance in sync, unlike an airplane or a car would, or an insect. We wonder about what they are. We need to find out. What about ghosts? You're probably wondering, well, that's Ned, that's the alien. Oh yeah, he died. That's right, he crashed. He got buried. Are there alien ghosts? Are there ghosts of aliens as well? Or what about Bigfoot? It's something we don't really think about a lot. Are these something that actually happened? Jim Marsh talks about an alien ghost in Roswell that was seen by a nurse in a medical center several years back after the fact of the crash, and she says it was not a human ghost. It was indeed an alien with a large head, big black eyes, and it scared her to death. And so, are there alien ghosts? Maybe so. we're going to jump into some theories. And I'm going to run through these really quick because we're pressed on time. But this is all speculation. It's something that I've been interested in for a while. And here's some ideas about what this could all mean and help us to understand about the nature of reality. Big prevalent concept is the ancient astronaut theory we see on ancient aliens, right? Are there ancient aliens that have been here from times past interacting and manipulating our world? Maybe so. Eric von Däniken, founding father of ancient astronaut theory, he talks about the chariots of the gods, how they came here. They shared technology, they shared culture. Everything comes from that, he says. David Hatcher Childress thinks, maybe it's more about ancient civilizations. Atlantis, they share their technology. Maybe that's what it is. Clifford Mahudi, Zuni elder medicine man, talks about the star people. Seems like Native Americans have a long and strong connection with these star people. William Henry takes a different route. He says maybe they're spiritual entities, talking about light beings, and their technology is a spiritual one. Michael Tellinger says these ancient sites are forms of technology that we have yet to understand, happening all over the world in places like South Africa, made of materials that we now use in microchips, like quartzile. Are they interdimensional? This is a now prevalent theory that we're just getting into in the field of ufology that people are agreeing more upon. But Richard Dolan talks about the interdimensional hypothesis and that maybe they've been here in different dimensions all along. We just can't see them because they phase in and out, perhaps. Greg Bishop, just recently at the Extraterrestrial Challenge conference, talks about alternative views, that maybe they're not just flesh and blood aliens. Maybe we're dealing with something completely and entirely different, a spiritual or paranormal nature. Could be any of those. Are they demons? Many people coming from a biblical and religious perspective seem to think that they might be demonic in origins and that biblical literature lends credence to that. Maybe so. What about time travelers? Are they us from the future coming back to save us from ourselves on a positive from a negative timeline? That could very well be the case. What about breakaway civilizations? Are there places like Inner Earth, Hollow Earth, cavernous places that we don't really have access to? Are they good or bad? Are they here to help us with our ascension and our spiritual development? Are they enslaving us? Are there positive and negative ETs? A lot of rhetoric about this online, but people have different experiences, both good and bad. So, what about abductions? People talk about some frightening things where it's not so friendly. But then people talk about, oh, I was taken, or I was asked, or I invited them. So we call those experiences, and we say that those are experiencers rather than abductees. They weren't taken against their will. My good friend Travis Walton was taken aboard a vehicle for almost a week and was gone. Taken during work and struck, as you can see in that picture, and his friends, his coworkers thought he was dead. They left him. And then they went back to try to find him. He was gone. He awoke aboard a craft with beings. He was in a panic. He tried to get out. Finally, he saw some humanoid-looking people. He thought we're bringing him to a military installment. They put him back under. He awoke later and ran to the nearest telephone in a different place, called up his brother, found out, I've got facial hair. How long has it been? He was gone for 5 days. They may have killed him accidentally by getting too close to that ship. An arc of light came out and struck him. They fixed him somehow, threw him back out there in a different place. Yvonne Smith, she has done tremendous work in the clinical hypnotherapy field and helps to do regressions on people that have had traumatic experiences. She's looking to do civil work, to do things to help get people in a more legal situation acknowledged. So she's doing some tremendous work there. People like Whitley Strieber talk about his experience and teachings with them in his books like Communion, as you may have seen. And so we have other things like crop circles. Are aliens making crop circles? Are they landing in ships and pressing down into the crops? Well, it seems that people like Linda Moulton Howe talk about how these are very intricately designed and are altered forms of physics that are genetically altering the crops, that it's not just a ship landing, but they seem to be a form of resonance that might be causing this alteration. Very interesting phenomenon. What about airships? Can airships account for these UFO sightings? Is this something that we can find to be substantiated by reports going back in time? Well, Tui Snyder talks about the great airship mystery that happened in the 1800s. People seeing these airships with various wings and appendages and cargo holds. And so it could be that we're dealing with some kind of alternative form of technology that was not publicly accessible. Walter Bosley talks about the Sonora Aero Club, which is a secretive project under the guise of NIMSA, very interesting concept, of a group of scientists in an elite collaborative think tank that made airships back in the 1800s that they flew around the world. Very interesting. Well, where did that technology go? Did the Nazis get it? Well, Nazis did actually have what they called the bell, die Glocke. And Olaf Phillips talks about how they were trying to develop a number of technologies. Did they have spaceships or space travel, technology capabilities? Perhaps. Jim Marrs shares about how in Operation Paperclip, the Nazi scientists went over to the US after World War II was over, and guess what? We got the rocket and space program. It's kind of ironic. Well, what about a secret space program? Has there been a parallel development going on? They do have conferences about this where people talk about black budget expenditures and where money is being allotted into that we can't account for. Is it a military expense? Could be. People like Corey Good have been sharing about their experiences or their accounts of the secret space program and collaborations with ETs. Very prevalent figure in this current scheme of things in spokesperson for Gaia. What about top secret aliens? Are there aliens being stored in some military facility around the world? Stan Friedman seems to think that there are groups like the Majestic 12, which was an official government or unofficially acknowledged government group that collaborated with high figures that basically tried to keep this under wraps and didn't want a lot of people to understand, put it under the seal of defense secrecy so that no one could find out. But of course, documents leak, things are declassified, and we have this mysterious group like MJ12. Are there places like Area 51 housing alien bodies or debris of crashed ships and back-engineered technologies? Well, Area 51 in Groom Lake, Nevada does exist. Do they have aliens? Well, that's classified, I can't tell you. But my good friend Noe Torres has been there, not to the base, but to the viewing center, viewing area, I should say. You can only go so close until they start sending out jeeps and helicopters, but he has done a lot of interesting research to show that there are active personnel there, and they will stop you quick. You can go on tours, but only so far. Dr. Paul Laviolette, alternative scientist, and a number of other things, basically shares how, with the support of Lazar and other commenters, basically they do have these craft that seem to be back engineered. Have they done autopsies? Are there any medical records to coincide with this? Well, apparently there are some that find that there were autopsies that may have even been recorded and then mocked and changed up to cover up. Nick Redfern talks about the men in black who come out for those who have these weird experiences or encounters and try to silence them. Some of them end up being sick afterward. And so it's something that we can see, is it part of the government agency? But they have a vested interest in the men in black as much as people who investigate it, because they want to know, who are these people in black posing as government agents trying to threaten people? It could be that they're unworldly also. What about the military? Are they the ones behind the UFO phenomenon? Well, it definitely seems like they've been at it for some time trying to make unconventional aircraft that we don't have in the public sector. Robert Salas talks about his experiences at nuclear facilities where UFOs came over and deactivated the nuclear devices because they seem to have some kind of interest in making sure that we don't mess up with some kind of nuclear disaster. Jim Marrs shares about how there are officially documented governmental studies with remote viewing which seem to have uncovered a sense of aliens. And so Nick Redfern talks about the Roswell conspiracy where basically they might not have been aliens. It could have been a military experiment where they used people to, get together and say, let's make this experiment where it'll, try to frighten some people, and it could be something completely different than what we think. Are the aliens forms of artificial intelligence? Well, it very well could be. A lot of people seem to think that they are self-simulating, self-replicating types of software that ancient civilizations, or let's say alien species, have put together. And do we have any evidence for this? Well, this is a sky viewing party we had with Ben Hansen, former FBI agent and guest on the show Fact or Faked, who basically shows us that we can use night vision to look up in the sky and see exponentially more things than we thought we could before. Dr. Lynn Katai has great evidence, you could say, of the Phoenix Lights, which was a phenomenon 20 years ago that flew over low, an enormous craft perhaps. Daryl Sims, the alien hunter, he shows that a lot of people have implants and markings and bruises and things that have happened after strange experiences that lead to indications of alien involvement, perhaps. Michio Kaku, on the other hand, spokesperson for the Science Channel, basically denies the possibilities of back engineering UFOs and says it's all nonsense, but that we live in a future that's based in humanity's advancement and technology and physics. So there could be some middle ground there. What about the moon? People think it could be, in fact, a hollow artificial space station made by aliens and brought here in ancient times. We also have the backside of the moon being photographed by the satellite Clementine. Are there structures on the back? A lot of people have thought so. What about flat Earth? It's a really strange thing, right? It's being kind of become more viral lately. People talking about the Earth being flat sounds crazy, but people like Rob Skiba tries to give from really substantiating evidence to show that we live in a world that we thought, that is completely different than we actually thought. What about a hologram? Do we live in a hologram? Well, I propose a theory that I like to refer to as mythos, which is the mythological operating system, that we live in a system that's been constructed sometime in the ancient days that has been something we have to basically interact within, like a computer simulation. And we have to wonder about who's operating that system. That's the question. Richard Dolan talks a lot about the simulation hypothesis and that we live in a sort of virtual reality. What about the government? Are the aliens like ruling the world or something? Well, do we have any official standpoints? The U.S. Department of Defense's John Alexander says UFOs are real and there is something to it. And they're not just all nuts and bolts vehicles. They're anywhere from energy to anything. And there's a lot going on that people don't realize. The UK's Department of Defense, Nick Pope, he's come out. He's the Fox Mulder of the UK's X-Files. He looked into the Rendlesham Forest encounter, and that was something that's probably one of the most well-known cases in ufology. But he's an official that's come out and said UFOs do exist. Well, what about disclosure? Are we going to have disclosure? Olaf Phillips shares something I think is really important, a quote by Lockheed Martin's and Skunk Works' Ben Rich. Ben Rich says, "We now have the technology to take ET home." Dr. Paul Violette also shares Ben Rich's quote, "We already have the means to travel amongst the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity." Lockheed Martin and Skunk Works is just down the road, guys. We could be sitting on some incredible technologies that the public sector will never see. And that's the unfortunate part, because the employees were told this will trickle down into the public sector. It's been several decades. Have you guys ever been in a flying triangle? Flown over, to the other side of the world in 5 minutes? No, I haven't either, but maybe someday. So, do they exist? I think that there's pretty good substantiating evidence to show that we're dealing with all kinds of things, that they, all the different theys that they are here, and that we are here with them. And of course, hopefully, someday we'll get our own flying saucers. But remember, as long as technology advances, are people going to stay the same? So everything you saw here today is mostly available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/vortexusnetwork. I want to thank you guys and thanks SoulTopia for allowing me the opportunity to come and share with you here today. So if you have anything you'd like to share, I'd be glad to connect with each and every one of you. And I've got some information in the back and some other things if you'd like to check out. It'd be a great honor, and I want to just thank you all for your time today.